to you, Maggie. It'll just take a little while to come up. Yep, and just take it away.
Okay, thanks, Donna. My name is Maggie Egling and I'm an educational psychologist at Aberdeen City Council. I work in the Dawn locality group and therefore I work with parents, teachers and young people who attend schools and early learning centres in the Bridge of Dawn, Old Macker, Dice and St Macker Associated Schools groups. My colleague Nick Chapman and I will be joining you this evening, somehow on the screen, to talk about the approach known as emotion coaching. So first of all, let's look at what will be happening this evening and what we aim to achieve. Now, first of all, I hope to move on to the next slide. So hopefully you're seeing slide 2. So I guess the unwritten aim tonight is that you enjoy yourself and you hear about an approach that you might consider using yourself. Specifically, we're going to give a general orientation about what we mean by emotion coaching. We're also going to provide some practical information about the emotion coaching steps, and there are a few of them. And hopefully this will enable you to think about how and if these can be used with your children some of the time. Nick is going to really share some hints and tips about what you can do to support your children manage their feelings later on in the webinar today. And we'll also share information about the claimed benefits of emotion coaching. And finally, we hope that after attending today that you really feel confident enough to go and try emotion coaching yourself. So if we just move on to the next slide. I've kind of said some of this, but I'm just going to go through it again. So in terms of the webinar outline, we appreciate that there will be different amounts of awareness and experience about emotion coaching that are listening today. So to start off with, we're going to play a brief introductory video that will introduce you to the approach or perhaps refresh some of the key ideas about emotion coaching. The next parts will be more practical, as I've mentioned, and Nick is going to talk through some of those practical tips that you can use at home. Today's webinar is very much the start of your journey with emotion coaching if you choose to take it. So we will be signposting you to some more information if you would like to find out more. And as Donna already mentioned, at the end, there will be time for some questions and there will be an evaluation to complete. So before I move into the next slide, it is a video and sometimes it automatically goes. So I'll still just talk a little bit before I move on to it. It's a 15-minute video. And it was actually made, you'll recognise me in it, it was actually made during the first lockdown of 2020. So there are a couple of references in the video that talk about the pandemic. The general ideas, though, still apply to many emotional moments. And whilst at the moment, thankfully, life is getting back to normal, more normal, when this video was made, for many of us, we still continue to feel some of those impacts of the pandemic. And whilst we're still seeing, there's light at the end of the tunnel now, there are still new challenges ahead, which we all know about. So it's still very relevant, although there are those sort of pandemic references. So I'm just going to move on and hopefully this video will start to play. This is the bit where I have to find the button. Here we go.
Maggie, I'm not hearing the sound.
Oh. You're not hearing the sound. I'm hearing the sound. That's not much good though, eh?
Maggie, maybe if you stop sharing and then reshare and make sure the button at the top's clicked.
Okay, let's try that. Let's try this again. helping children to understand their emotions.
Yep, we can hear that now.
Okay, I've just put it back
Hi,
to the beginning.
my
My name's Maggie Egling and I'm a trainee educational psychologist at Aberdeen City Council Educational Psychology Service. This is a short presentation about emotion coaching and it's aimed at parents and carers. Emotion coaching is basically about helping children to understand their emotions, why they occur, and how to handle them. Hope you find this useful. Why might emotion coaching be useful for you and your child? Sometimes in our lives we're faced with challenge and change, and that can affect our well-being. And that's certainly been the case, I think, for many of us during the pandemic. At this time, many children and their families are looking for ways to support well-being. And one of the ways that we can do that is by nurturing the relationships we have with each other. Sometimes children and young people and ourselves will become overwhelmed by big feelings and we won't quite know how to handle those feelings and we may behave in ways that we don't like. So, for example, your children might be frustrated and perhaps angry that they're not able to see their friends in the same ways that they used to. And that's where emotion coaching comes in. Emotion coaching is a proven approach that can be used by carers and parents to help support the development of effective stress management skills in children. And the hope would be that if you use emotion coaching with your children at least some of the time, that will help your children to understand their emotions and be able to deal with those feelings better. Emotion coaching is a model with lots of evidence behind it, and it's rooted in brain science. I wanted to just run through some of the emotion coaching advantages that have been found by researchers like John Gottman and his colleagues. It's something that you can use to supplement what you already do with your children when you're parenting them. So it's a supplement. It's intended to enhance what you already do. It's simple to use and it can be used with all children to help them to thrive. And researchers who have used emotion coaching recommend normally that emotion coaching is used between 40 to 60% of the time. Normally, research finds that adult and child relationships are enhanced, and it's often cited that it helps parents or teachers, because many teachers in Aberdeen City Council use emotion coaching as well. It helps them to feel more confident and positive about the relationships they have with the children. And also, again, it could have advantages for yourself in terms of helping you to feel calm when children are experiencing big feelings. And over time, the hope is that with consistent use of emotion coaching, this will support children's well-being and resilience. So why might we use emotion coaching? Why might you think about trying out emotion coaching with your children? There is some evidence from John Gottman and his colleagues, whose picture's there, about how using emotion coaching has a positive impact on children. So it can be that children who are emotion coached demonstrate improved behaviour. So in the home and at school, these children behave in ways that are really positive for themselves and their peers and their teachers. Gottman also found that children achieved better in school. And there's also been some research done in England as well recently that also found the same things, that children who were emotion coached in the school setting achieved better results in their examinations. Another interesting finding is that children who are emotion coached generally have fewer illnesses. So in the studies that Gottman and his colleagues did, they found that the children tended to have better physical health. And to some extent, those findings have also been found in the UK as well. So in a study done in Bath, they also found that children had fewer illnesses and were off school less. The findings from the research also show that children who are emotion coached are more emotionally stable and they're more able to bounce back from setbacks, i.e. they're more resilient. Emotion coaching parents do these 5 things. In the work that John Gottman did, he found that parents who emotion coach their children do 5 things. Firstly, they are aware of the child's responses and emotions. 2, they recognise emotional times as opportunities for intimacy and teaching in the moment. 3, they listen empathetically to their child and validate the child's feelings. 4, parents who emotion coach their children help their child or children to label the emotions and put words for those emotions, and that helps to soothe the child and promote recovery. And finally, emotion coaching parents set limits while helping the child to problem solve. One of the key parts about this is normalising big emotions for children who may generally have minimal understanding that other people may feel like that too. And the second key part is setting limits on the behaviour. So you're doing all the groundwork to help the child understand their emotions, but you're not letting them get away with inappropriate or negative behaviour. So you're having discussions about inappropriate behaviour, but only after all the other steps have been followed. Other researchers have simplified Gottman's 5 steps into 4. In schools in Aberdeen, we use the 4-step model, which is on the next slide. So these are the 4 steps that you can try at home. Step 1, recognising the child's feelings and empathising with them. This first step is vital, and it is about recognising that the child is not coping and that this is a teaching opportunity. We really need to, no matter how hard, put ourselves in the child's shoes and really see the difficulty they are having. They may be reacting to something in a way that is not how we would react, but this step is about removing judgment and showing real empathy. And by doing this, we are more likely to respond calmly and warmly and help soothe our child's nervous system. Step 2, validate the feelings and label them. By simply validating and naming emotions for the child, we change our child's brain chemistry and better enable parts of their brain to communicate with each other. So simply naming an emotion calms their emotional brain. Step 3, sometimes step 3 is not required. So for example, if a child is very upset and crying, we do not need to set any limits because there is not inappropriate behaviour. However, if there is inappropriate behaviour, we set limits on this behaviour. It's just that the groundwork must be done first. So we are connecting with our child before we try to redirect them. Step 4 is about problem solving with the child and is the final step where we can look at different strategies to respond and we can work on these together. We're going to look at the emotion coaching steps in more detail. One of the common mistakes that we can make when supporting our children with big feelings is to try and fix things and get rid of the emotion really quickly. This comes from a good place since we are trying to make things better. However, this well-meaning approach can actually be dismissive or disapproving of the emotion and give our children confused messages. So if we say things like, "You don't need to be upset," or simply tell our child, "You're okay," when they really do not feel okay, we risk our children becoming confused about how they feel or having that feeling that we don't understand them. This is why step 1 is so important, acknowledging the child's feelings and empathising. Here are some ideas for things to say instead of "calm down" or "stop crying." And you can use these and come up with your own in emotionally challenging situations in the future. Here are a few examples of steps 2 and 3 that you can consider using and adapting at home. So step 2 is validate and label your child's feelings. So name it to tame it. You can also help your child by labeling emotions at different points in the day, or for the emotions of characters in stories or TV shows. And step 3 is about setting limits on behaviour, being careful not to set limits on the emotions. It is okay and normal to feel angry, scared, jealous or sad. What is not okay is inappropriate behaviour. Children are more likely to accept these limits if we spend time on steps 1 and 2. So we must aim to connect before we correct. So what does emotion coaching involve? It involves teaching your child about emotions when they're experiencing them. So helping your child to label emotions. If you can give the word for an emotion when it is happening, this helps your child to make the connection between the word and the feeling. So this means that you're observing and noticing when your child is dealing with an emotion and discussing it with them. There is a wee caution though. Sometimes it really is not the right time to talk through the emotion coaching steps. Perhaps when safety is the main concern, or when your child or yourself are in such a heightened state that it would not be sensible to try and engage them at that point. It's about catching them before they're overwhelmed, or sometimes catching them afterwards. It's also worth mentioning that using emotion coaching may feel uncomfortable to start with, but it is worth the effort. When children have their feelings acknowledged, they feel safer, and this is especially important in these strange times. So emotion coaching is about recognizing that all emotions are natural and normal. Emotions are meant to be felt and expressed. John Gottman said that we can use big feelings and see these as magic moments when you can use the emotion to connect with your child. These moments give you the opportunity to influence the way your children feel about themselves and about the world. Emotion coaching teaches children the important life skill of emotion regulation. Not only will this help them in the present, it will also help them to handle challenges that they face later on in their lives. Before I finish this taster session about emotion coaching, here is a reminder of the 4 steps. There are some sayings like connect, then redirect, and name before you tame, which we've mentioned in this short presentation. These come from Dan Siegel's book, The Whole Brain Child. The next slide contains a short video where Dan talks about these sayings and emotion coaching in more detail.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
If you want to find out more about emotion coaching, a good place to start is at Aberdeen City Council's Educational Psychology Service Digital Hub. The web address is given below. Also, consider following the Gottman Institute on Twitter. And if you would like to read a really accessible book, The Whole Brain Child by Dan Segal and Dr. Bryson is well worth a look. The Scottish Government have also produced some wellbeing resources, and they're available at clearyourhead.scot and also promise.scot. Okay, it's almost time for me to stop cringing after having to watch myself for such a long time there. Anyhow, it's time to hand over to Nick, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about emotion coaching.
Thank you, Maggie. Well done on listening to yourself. My name's Nick Chapman. I'm another one of the educational psychologists with Aberdeen City Council, and I work in the West locality. So we cover Bucksburn, Northfield and Hazelhead. So Maggie's discussed some background information about how emotion coaching came about, what emotion coaching is, what our 4-step model is, which is our simplified model that we share with families and schools. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about how we can think about getting started, having more emotion coaching conversations with our children, and I'm actually going to spend quite a bit of time talking about common mistakes that we all make. This is not to make anybody feel guilty or shame anybody. These are mistakes that we all make. But once we are aware of these common mistakes, it's much easier for us to avoid them in the future. And they are mistakes that come, as Maggie said, from a well-intentioned place. We see children upset, experiencing big emotions, and we want to fix things for them. You know, it's a natural empathetic response. But if we just try to get rid of big emotions for children and young people, we're not teaching them the vital skills to deal with and manage their emotions in healthy, positive ways in the future. So this slide, I've just got 4 kind of takeaway points that I think are quite relevant to think about when we're starting to use emotion coaching. And the first one is exactly that. Don't try to get rid of big emotions. So often as adults, when we see children and young people in distress or struggling, our natural response is to soothe them, to try and fix things, or even to try and put things into perspective by telling them that things aren't that bad. This is often an instinctive response, so it means it can be very automatic, and we might have to try really hard to get actively out of these bad habits that we all have. These responses come from a good place. We're trying to protect our children. We're trying to make them feel better. However, if we're just trying to get rid of big emotions quickly for them, we might unintentionally be shaming our children for feeling those emotions, teaching them that it's not okay to feel that way. That could mean that they hide those emotions in the future or become secretive, or just that they don't view us as a person that they can share those emotions with. Instead, we want to be teaching children to manage their emotions in positive ways in the future. So on Maggie's video, there was a couple of slides, things to say instead of stop crying, things to say instead of calm down. Those graphics are all on our hub if you want to go and have a look. Calm down, I think, is a really good one to talk about, because once you try and notice how often you say it, is really hard. You suddenly realise, oh my goodness, I say that all the time. And I suppose I always flip it to get adults to think about the last time you flipped your lid, because we're adults, but we're human, we become emotionally dysregulated. The last time you flipped your lid, maybe at your partner and had a bit of a tiz, if they told you to calm down, did it actually make you calm down? I think people are probably going, oh, actually, no, I hate being told to calm down. So why do we say it to our children all the time? It has the opposite effect, and it actually doesn't teach them anything about their emotions. So I suppose if we think of a situation where we might use calm down or stop yelling, let's try and turn that into an emotion coaching response. So I've got the 4 steps of emotion coaching as a reminder on this slide. When we're talking to schools and parents about starting to use this, we always get the feedback that it really helps to have these on display. So written on a sticky note or on the calendar. Sometimes teachers have them on lanyards or on their desks, because it's not an automatic way of talking to our children. So we need to, when we're starting to use this approach, have the 4 steps visible so that we can make sure we're working through them. It might seem a bit unnatural when you first start doing it, but the more often you practice, the more automatic and natural it will become. So you no longer need those steps. So just as a reminder, our steps are: step 1, acknowledge feelings and empathise. Step 2, validate feelings and label. Step 3, set limits on the behaviour. And step 4, supportive problem solving. So let's think of a classic example when we might tell a child to calm down or stop yelling. Maybe it's time to take their tablet away. And they're not happy about that, so maybe they're shouting, or maybe they're just giving us a bit of back chat. So instead of saying calm down or stop yelling, we can turn that into a more emotion coaching response by saying something like, I know you're really disappointed that your time on the tablet is finished. And I think you're probably pretty mad at me because I'm the one who's told you that it's got to go away. It's absolutely okay to be mad at me. Sometimes I get mad when I've got to finish doing something and I really don't want to. You can be mad at me, you can be angry at me, but it's not okay to scream and it's not okay to use mean words. Why don't we think about some of the other anger strategies we can use? Can you remember some of the things we've talked about? And then depending on their age, we could go over anger strategies that we've discussed. So roaring like a lion for a very young child, or finger breathing, it's good for any age, take a break, whatever it is we've discussed. So children are going to be much more receptive to us setting limits on their behaviour, which is not to yell or not to shout or not to use mean words, only once we've spent time going over steps 1 and 2. So validating their feelings, acknowledging the situation they're in, empathising with how they're feeling. And one of the other things that people can say when they're first starting to use this approach, they can reflect, actually, I went over steps 1 and 2 a bit too quickly and I tried to set the limit too quickly. But this all comes with practice, and we'd hope that from today you can go away and start practicing using this with your children so it becomes a more natural response. So the second sort of takeaway that I wanted to talk about was all emotions are healthy. So all emotions are normal, they're all healthy, and actually they're not under our control. So sometimes when we're thinking about emotion coaching, we may need to challenge our own views on emotions. We can often view certain emotions as bad or negative or even ugly. And the responses we can give to our children can reinforce these ideas. So I suppose I'm thinking about things like, I don't like it when you get angry, or, oh, it's not nice to be jealous, or, oh, there's nothing to be scared of, don't be silly, or, oh, stop crying, big boys don't cry, big girls don't cry. These are all quite disapproving of emotions, and they give children the message that it's not good to experience certain emotions, when actually all emotions are out with our control. You know, we can't control how we feel, and all emotions, even so-called ugly ones, are completely normal, and we all experience them. Just because we view an emotion as bad, we're not a bad person for experiencing that emotion. Instead, we should be teaching our children, so instead of saying stop crying, we should be teaching our children that it's okay to cry. Actually, crying is a really healthy and normal response to sadness, and crying can help us work through those feelings of sadness and ultimately feel better. Similarly with anger, I think a lot of people get quite triggered by anger and have quite negative views of anger. But if people never got angry about social injustices like slavery or women not having equal rights, then we wouldn't have had positive change. So anger is not a bad emotion. What we might sometimes mean is the behaviour we see associated with anger might be negative. And the same with jealousy. Lots of adults have very negative views of jealousy and think it's not nice to be jealous. Actually, it's perfectly natural to be jealous. If Maggie won the lottery and went and bought a nice house in Dubai, I'd be jealous, and that's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person. And it's important to separate out actions. So it's actions that might be inappropriate, not the emotions. And if we don't separate that out, children may learn to attach shame and guilt to certain emotions. And this can really impact their self-esteem on the inevitable occasions when they do experience some of these so-called bad emotions. They might feel self-loathing, that they shouldn't feel that way. And the steps of emotion coaching help us naturally separate out feelings and emotions from behaviour. So it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to scream or be aggressive. Or it's okay to be jealous, but it's not okay to steal or be unkind. The third thing I'm going to talk about is talking about something does not make it worse. So we can fall into this trap a lot when our children are experiencing worries or fear or anxiety. A common response we can give children in this situation is, you're fine, everything's fine, you're okay, it's okay. And this is often in response to their worries or fears. Again, it comes from a really good place. We want to reassure children and we want them to be fine. Or sometimes as adults, we know that there's really nothing to be scared of and we think it's a bit silly to be scared of something. But remember what Maggie was saying, emotion coaching involves putting ourselves in our children's shoes, no matter how hard that is. So children are going to experience fear or worry over things that we might know they don't have anything to worry about. But those feelings of fear and anxiety and worry are very real for children, and they need to be validated, not dismissed and not disapproved of. So same if something makes a child angry, I don't know, if a toddler's kicking off because they can't eat dog food, we're not letting them eat dog food, we might think that that's really silly, but we've got to understand that for that child, their emotions are very, very real. We are adults with more fully developed brains. We have better vocabulary. We have a better understanding of reality versus fantasy. We've got more life experience, more understanding of our emotions, and we've got more practice dealing with them. So we need to recognise that children are sort of much less advanced than us. So it's our role to help them understand all of these big feelings happening in their brains, not get rid of them and not judge them. So if we just say you're fine or there's nothing to be scared of, we're not validating these real feelings. We're potentially causing a disconnect between us and our children because they're experiencing fear, but we're telling them they're fine. So they're thinking, well, she doesn't get me at all. I worked with a pupil who had very severe school phobia, so he was having proper panic attacks about school. We did a lot of work together, and when I could actually get him to talk about what he could remember from those times, he just kept saying all he could remember was mum and dad saying, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Now, they were really well-intentioned. They wanted him to be fine. They wanted to calm him down. But actually, when he's having a panic attack and he's being told you're fine, either A, if this is fine, then the world is terrifying and confusing, or B, they think I'm fine. They don't get me. They don't understand me at all. We think that saying you're anxious is going to make a child worse, but it's not. As Maggie said, there's evidence from neuroscience that naming an emotion for a child actually helps soothe and calm their brain. So we can say, you're really worried, you're really anxious, I know you're really scared right now. Maybe your heart's beating really fast, maybe you're feeling really panicky. And if we're going to try and reassure them, we want it to be with factual statements. So I promise I'm going to wait here with you. I promise I'm going to ride this out with you. I promise this feeling won't last forever. I will keep you safe. Those are much more reassuring than you're okay, there's nothing to be scared of, you're fine. Another time we can fall into the trap of thinking that talking about things is going to make them worse is when our children come to us with uncomfortable, big, scary topics. So I suppose sex would be one, war would be one that's quite relevant for recently, or death. We think that children are too young to talk about things, or we worry that if we talk to them about these topics, we're going to make them more worried, and actually it's easier to protect them. But if we don't talk to children about topics like this, we risk their worries going unanswered. We risk them coming to their own conclusions, and worries growing out of control. Again, we risk a disconnect that they think they can't talk to us about important things. Or we risk their only source of education being from their friends or peers in the playground or the internet, or just misinterpreting things that they see in the news, in the media. So not talking to children about something doesn't protect them from it. It simply doesn't prepare them for it. And the last thing I'm going to talk about, which Dan Scull talked about in his video, is normalise making a repair. So we should practice. I'm going to talk a little bit in another slide about how to support children to talk to us about their emotions. And one of the main things we can do is model talking to them about our emotions, or talking as a family about our own emotions. But we should also practice normalising when we get things wrong, or when we have an outburst, when we flip our lids. We're human as well. So say you're getting really stressed doing dinner and you end up screaming at everybody. Afterwards, talk to your children about what happened. You know, say, when I was cooking tea, I was really busy, I'm really tired, I've had a really busy day today, I was getting really stressed, I was getting really hot, stuff was burning, I thought everything was going to get ruined. All of these things meant that I got really overwhelmed and I flipped my lid. I shouted, and that's not okay. I'm sorry I shouted, I should have tried something else. And then say, I should have tried counting to 10 or asking somebody for help. As adults, we can find it really hard to apologise to children. I mean, I'm going to change that. Actually, I can find it really hard to apologise to anybody. I'm going to be honest about that. But we specifically think that if we apologise to children, it's a sign of weakness or it disempowers us. But actually, showing accountability is a real strength. And when we model this to our children and we model making a repair, we support them to develop these skills as well. I think I'm ready for my next slide, Maggie. So before you play it,
just pause it. Yep.
Yeah, it's really hard to find videos of emotion coaching online. There's lots of script ideas, so you can go and look for script ideas. So this is just a really nice short clip that you might recognise from Inside Out. Inside Out is a great film to watch with kids when you're thinking about emotions, but this is just a clip where Bing Bong has lost his rocket and Joy thinks, oh, don't talk about it. If you talk about it, it's going to make it worse, whereas Sadness is doing a really nice job of emotion coaching.
My rocket! Wait, Riley and I were still using that rocket. It still has some strong power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket to the top. Riley and I are going to the moon. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
You can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, how to support children to talk about emotions. I've got on there, you know, watching films and TV programs. So Inside Out is a really great film about emotions. You know, Joy is running around trying to get rid of all the bad emotions and just have joy all the time. And the message is that that doesn't work, actually. That's not life, you know. Life is feeling the vast spectrum of human emotions, and some of those are less pleasant. It might not feel nice to be sad, but we feel sadness because, you know, we grieve because we love. It's part of human experience. So it's a really great film to watch. If you've already watched it, watch it again thinking about emotion coaching. But actually, you can watch any film. You know, if your kid's obsessed with Frozen, you can watch that and then have a discussion afterwards about some of the emotions that the characters might have been feeling. You know, Anna and Elsa, what were their different perspectives and different emotions when they weren't talking? What would have helped communicating with each other? So you can fit it for anything that your child's interested in. I've got a picture of the anger iceberg. We kind of share this with schools quite a lot. This is good for separating out behaviours from feelings. So the idea is, you know, sometimes if a child's upset, all I can see is what looks like angry behaviour, but actually sometimes the angry behaviour is just the tip of the iceberg, and what I can't see is all of these other emotions going on underneath. Do you think you might have been feeling any of these? And that can be a good discussion tool for older children. Games. So we live in a world where you can order anything on the internet or get anything on Pinterest or find anything, so you can look for games around emotions. But I suppose some very simple ideas would be printing off pictures of different emojis and writing the names of the different emotions and playing matching pairs with young children. You know, does that emotion match that word? You can obviously read the word for them if they're not at that stage, or creating a simple board game, you know, with numbers like snakes and ladders, where you do half of the squares that you land on are like do a silly dare, like do a dance or make up a rap about the dog, and the other half are emotions, and you either have to act out that emotion or talk about a time you felt that emotion. And those are kind of games you can play as a family. You're not going to go from being a family who haven't discussed emotions that much to being a family that discusses emotions openly all the time. It's about introducing things gradually. And like I say, one of the easiest ways to do that is to model talking about emotions yourself. Also, characters and stories. If we're reading books, we can do the same. We can talk about motivations and why a character might have done something, how they might have been feeling. And we can have emotion check-ins as a family. There's lots of nice ideas online. We've got one on our digital hub, where we just make it a regular activity that everybody in the family says how they're feeling that day, maybe in the morning or maybe at the end of the day. Next slide, Maggie.
Do you like the video one now?
No, I'll just introduce the video. So I think we live in quite an emotionally illiterate society. So a lot of these mistakes come about because, you know, oh, we don't talk about that, or sweep that under the carpet, or, you know, stiff upper lip, or keep calm and carry on. But another thing that impacts how we respond to emotions is how we, the messages that we received about emotions when we were growing up. So we might be more triggered by some emotions than others, depending on how those emotions were dealt with in the house that we grew up with, or what messages we got from teachers. And we might find ourselves being more triggered by certain emotions that our child displays. But just by being aware of this, we can start to break that cycle. So that's just what this video is about. And I'll get, it's talking about your own, they call it shark music. So I'll get Maggie to play it.
Parents. Throughout history, we've struggled to get it right. We hope we won't pass on our emotional issues to our kids, and we swear we won't make the same mistakes our parents did. We all have great intentions, but something seems to get in the way. Let's look at what that might be. At Circle of Security Parenting, we believe that being emotionally available to our children and their needs is the key to doing our best as parents. We call emotional availability being with. It means teaching emotional intelligence by being with our children in all their feelings, like sadness, joy, anger, curiosity, pain, frustration, excitement, and so on. Being with children helps them understand, trust, and move on from feelings. And knowing someone is with them in their feelings helps children feel less overwhelmed and more secure. Decades of research backs this up. For parents, some of this comes easily, but other times our children express emotions that make us uncomfortable, so we pull away or try to overrule their feelings, which leaves them on their own. We do this because our children's feelings can trigger strong emotions in us. We think of it like this: our history during childhood of how core people responded to our different emotions creates the background music for how we experience our children's feelings. Let's look at this example. This girl and her father have been enjoying time together in the park, but suddenly aware of the time, Dad says, "We need to go." When the girl hears this, she starts crying and gets increasingly angry. All at once, the dad's background music changes. The background music that is playing for the father right now, we call shark music. As it turns out, the dad's own mother was uncomfortable with loud displays of emotion, and she didn't know how to handle them. So throughout his childhood, she repeatedly told her son it was pathetic to cry, and she never ever asked him about his feelings of sadness or anger. His ability to deal with his daughter's emotion now is greatly affected by the experience with his mother then. Shark music. We're rarely aware it's playing, but it's our past experiences telling us to be afraid of or uncomfortable with a feeling or need that is actually safe. When our shark music limits our ability to respond to these feelings, our children learn to hide or feel ashamed of them. This is a problem because we're teaching our children to fear emotions that are actually both safe and essential in life. Most of us experience shark music with one emotion or another, and it's different for everyone. But whenever it is triggered, our ability to respond to our children's needs is limited. The good news is, by simply calling it by name and reflecting on what our children need in the moment, we can turn down our shark music. This is so important because if we can learn to manage our history of negative experiences and perceptions, we can respond to the truth of our child's current situation and be with them in it. Ultimately, this will help our children grow up with a better ability to understand and share more of the emotions they experience. There's no escaping it. Strong feelings are a challenge to manage as parents, but our children always benefit when we have an accurate response to what's happening, rather than reacting to the shark music we're bringing into the relationship. Remember, there's no such thing as perfect parenting, and blame never helped anyone feel more secure. That includes blaming ourselves. But the more often we can identify our shark music, the better off our children will be.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, once we start to think about actually I'm more triggered by this emotion, just being aware of that can help us kind of dial back being triggered, and we can do something about it. I also just wanted to say that I suppose we haven't really gone into it, but when a child is having a full-blown meltdown, so they've absolutely flipped their lid, that is not the time to be doing emotion coaching. Actually, their thinking brain is offline and they're not going to be able to reason and listen. So what we want to try and do is try and have emotion coaching conversations when they're just starting to teeter, when we can just see a bit of frustration, or after a big meltdown. And in the long run, the more often we're having emotion coaching conversations with children around lower level emotions, we'll see a knock-on impact of them having less tantrums in the long run. And also just to say, we touched on it in Maggie's video, you only need to be using emotion coaching 40 to 60% of the time for it to be having a real positive impact. This includes school, so it's not all down to you. And that's kind of recognising that sometimes we're not in a place to emotion coach. You know, we might be triggered and we might not be able to control being triggered, and that's okay, we're all human. But by having these emotion coaching conversations more regularly when children are experiencing lower level emotions, they will be better able to manage their big angry emotions in the future. And next slide, Maggie. So Maggie's already mentioned these are just signposting for where to find out a little bit more. I know we've kind of talked and given you a lot of information today, but the idea is that you can go away and start practicing using it, and finding a way that fits for you. So the Whole Brain Child was the book. The Gottman Institute have social media sites. That is our hub, and I've just added on the bottom a website that I use and refer back to all the time, the Hey Sigmund website. It's by a lady called Karen Young, who has a book called Hey Warrior, which is a book teaching children about anxiety and why anxiety happens. But she's got a website, Hey Sigmund, and it's got a parent section, and you can go to either younger kids or there's a section for teens. It's got great articles about, you know, how to get your teen to open up more. Lots of different things. So I kind of use that quite a lot, and I thought it would be quite helpful because I know there's probably parents here with children of lots of different ages, so it's got everything kind of covered. And I think our final slide. That's good. It's flashing up 5 minutes left in your scheduled meeting time, and we said that was the time we'd run to, so I haven't droned on for too long. But yeah, I suppose just time for questions if there are any. I know we've talked about quite a lot, so it's a lot to take in, and also just to ask you please to do those evaluation forms. It only takes about 45 seconds, like Donna said. I did have a look, Donna, in the Q&A, and I couldn't see any questions.
Everybody's been very quiet. I've just put up your parent link on your Learning Hub.
Yeah, great.
To that, and I put on our Parent Learning Hub too. Is where we'll post this video, this recording. So, and they're both linked to each other. Nick and I worked on that during the lockdown.
Yeah, we became tech savvy. Yeah, our digital hub has got a whole section for parents, and we've got pages on emotion coaching, a page on supporting anxiety, a page on talking to children about difficult subjects, a page on self-regulation. So there is quite a lot on there for you to have a look at as well.
So when I send out the recording, I will put that on the your website as well. So yeah, just so that we can. So somebody's just asked, will this video be available after today? Yes, it will. That's an easy question to answer. Yeah, I'll just edit it a little bit, and I will email you back out on Eventbrite link just to make sure, and we put it on our Parent Learning Hub so that, and I've got a YouTube channel for Stronger Families. So we've got another question coming in. So how can I help my child identify her emotions when she's unsure of her own feelings? There we go.
Yeah, so like I say, talking about other people's emotions can be really helpful when the stakes are lower, because it helps normalize talking about emotions. And then I suppose when we're thinking about younger children trying to develop their understanding of emotions, we might want to provide additional support around, when we're talking about an emotion, describing what it looks like, maybe using mirrors with children and you know, practice making different emotion faces. What does it look like when you pretend you're angry? Oh, look, my eyes go really wide, or my frown goes like this. What does it feel like when we get angry in our bodies? Oh, my fists are all clenched and my tummy feels a bit rumbly and my face goes a bit red. Or embarrassed. Oh, how would I know if you're embarrassed? Let's pretend we're embarrassed. So really drawing attention to children about those physiological changes in our body. That's how we kind of help their emotional literacy. I don't know if, Maggie, you've got anything else to add?
No, I think that's wonderful what you've just said, Nick. I guess the thing is, like, with whatever word comes up, I think it's about probing because I thought of I'm thinking of a recent conversation I had with a pupil, and he was telling me about the personality of his cat. It was a dog, sorry, actually, dog. And it was like, oh, that one's a really grumpy dog. And actually, when we got into the conversation, it turned out that his meaning for grumpy was really quite different from mine. It meant something else to him. So I guess it was like that to and fro of teasing out what the word that's used, what it means for that person too, and kind of getting a shared understanding. Oh, for me, when I'm talking about angry and you're talking about angry, this is what it means. When we're talking about grumpy, this is what it means. And then just working on that over time.
There's also the feelings vocabulary wheel, which has that, and it has like sort of 8 sections. So yeah, it might have a loose section for angry, and then it goes into frustrated, annoyed, and it has all of those words. So as children are getting older, yes, you're developing that language by talking about different words and speaking about more emotions.
Thanks, Nick. Is that wheel available? Can people see that online? I've got other questions coming in, but I just wondered if that was a link that we could send on at some point, or they could access that.
I think if you look up emotion check-ins or emotion vocabulary wheel, you'll get different images, and it'll be working out what's appropriate for your child's age and stage. And we would say for any children that are younger or have communication difficulties or additional support needs, being as visual as possible. That's where some of the nice pictures or the blob tree that we've got on our hub can help.
Okay, thank you for that. So a couple of questions here. Is there any in-school support for children at academy stage to help with their emotions and emotion coaching? So I suppose it depends on which school, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose that's a bit of a tricky one to answer. I mean, guidance teachers, pastoral care staff are generally pretty good at doing that sort of thing in their PSE lessons, and that's where that kind of support would come. And I suppose it's about asking the individual school as well.
Yeah. And their last question, well, no, we've got a few more questions coming in, but the other one is, are there any sessions for children? Do we teach our children about this?
We haven't done any sessions on emotion coaching, and the idea would be that it's an approach for adults in the children's life to scaffold the conversations about emotion coaching. So the input for children is the conversations that you're having with them, or if we're doing training to school staff, the input to children is the conversations that they're having for them. And we actually don't have a children's section on our hub, but I think the Hey Sigmund section, and we do have some like child-friendly videos on our hub. So I think links to you know, some of the flipping your lid videos or managing big emotions, we've got child-friendly videos on there.
Yeah, so we do have one last question, and that's just about with a child that's got autism and speech delay, struggles with their emotions. What sort of support can educational psychology do in school and help him to develop his emotion regulation? So that's quite a specific and targeted question, but I suppose if we looked at generally, what kind of, if you think about your own jobs and what you're doing in there to support emotion regulation, is there anything that you're doing that you could kind of share? Or
I mean, it's maybe for me just to mention how we work in schools. All of your schools in the city will have a sort of locality group that they work to. So West, Don or D, and they may have a specific name psychologist. We can have early intervention consultations with class teachers about pupils which do not involve us becoming involved. It's just a universal support. And I suppose if you're concerned that your child has some problems, their class teacher can easily ask to have an early intervention consultation with the educational psychologist, where we might talk about different supports and strategies that they can try. If they've got autism and they've got communication difficulties, we might be looking at adding in visuals, social stories around emotions. It would really be about what level they're at. But again, helping to use visuals to teach them to understand their emotions more and to normalise emotions. And if it's specific behaviours that they've mentioned, pushing, hitting and kicking, do we need a social story around actually it's not okay to hit or kick or whatever that behaviour is? That's something schools can be quite good at as well, because they have lots of children who need those kind of supports. So really it's about finding out what are school already doing, having that discussion with them. And if you feel that maybe they're not doing enough or there's something missing, have they talked to speech and language? Speech and language have a consultation line that they can phone. They don't need involvement from speech and language. Or have they talked to their educational psychologist or whoever else just to get a bit more? Have they talked to Autism Outreach? Again, they can phone them up for a consultation to get a little bit of advice, depending on the situation or who's involved. There's different agencies that can provide help without being formally involved.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that, Nick. Well, I'm just conscious of the time. We're 3 minutes over, but I hope that everyone's found it really helpful. I certainly have taken something away. I'd never seen the shark music thing, so one of the things that I'm going to take away is turn the shark music down and don't limit my ability to parent well, particularly when you've got 3 teenagers in the house. So yeah, so thank you very much. I've learned lots tonight too. We will be publishing this in the next week or so, and I'll send out some of the links as well, helpful links to the websites again. And I just want to thank you for coming along, and I want to thank Maggie and Nick for their time this evening. So yeah, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.